The plates rattled faintly in her hands as she wove through the narrow aisle between the bar and the front tables, the din of the dinner rush rising all around her. It was the kind of night when every table was full, the air thick with overlapping conversations, clinking glassware, and the constant hiss from the kitchen. She spotted him immediately. He was sitting at the corner of the bar in a perfectly tailored navy suit, silver watch glinting under the overhead lights, hair slicked back with precision. Even before she reached him, she could feel his eyes tracking her. "Finally," he said, the word dragged out just enough to make the people sitting beside him smirk. She smiled politely, keeping her voice steady. "Good evening. What can I get for you to start?" He leaned back on the stool like he owned the place. "You can start by telling me why it took so long for someone to notice me. I've been here." He glanced at the man sitting next to him for emphasis. "What, 3 minutes?" The man chuckled. She nodded slightly, making a mental note not to rise to it. "I'm here now," she said, her tone neutral. "Would you like to see the menu?" He waved his hand dismissively. "I know what I want. Scotch. Neat. And make sure it's something worth drinking." She turned to pour it without comment, the weight of his gaze still on her. When she set the glass down in front of him, he tapped it once with a ringed finger. Now we're getting somewhere. She could feel the couple at the far end of the bar watching the interaction, the woman raising her eyebrows at the man. He didn't notice. He was too busy making himself the center of the room. When she returned to take his food order, he interrupted her greeting. "Hold on, don't tell me the specials. I don't need you reciting things I can read myself." Her patience tightened, but held. "Of course. What would you like?" "I'll take the ribeye, medium rare. And listen, don't mess it up. Last time I ordered a steak in this city, it was practically still mooing. I'm trusting you with this." His voice was loud enough that 2 seats down, a man in a baseball cap looked up from his burger. She just wrote the order, thanked him, and stepped away. Behind the bar, she exhaled slowly. She had served enough customers to know the difference between someone having a bad day and someone making sport of belittling the person taking their order. This man enjoyed the performance. He was playing to his audience, even if it was just the handful of people within earshot. She kept her smile fixed when she returned with his drink refill, even when he made a comment about her being more attentive now. He didn't know she had endured far worse and stayed standing. She could handle his words. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this particular customer's night would take a turn neither of them expected. Her feet already ached, and the clock said she still had 4 hours to go. She kept her pace even, the same practiced rhythm she had learned over years of working nights, because stopping meant thinking about how tired she was. The smell of frying onions and seared meat drifted in from the kitchen, mingling with the sharper scent of spilled beer near the bar. She could move through it without thinking now. Smile. Take the order. Deliver it hot. Collect the tip. Repeat. In her mind, she kept 2 other ledgers, the ones that mattered more than the receipts. One was the rent her mother was scrambling to keep up with ever since the second layoff notice arrived. The other was her younger brother's tuition payment, due in less than 2 weeks, the balance still bigger than it should be. Those 2 numbers followed her everywhere, even here, slipping between the clatter of plates and the murmur of customers. She had picked up every extra shift the manager would give her, telling herself she could rest next month maybe, morning shifts that bled into evening ones, weekend doubles where she barely saw daylight. It was wearing her down. She could feel it in her shoulders, in the way her hands sometimes trembled by the end of a rush, but this was the only way to keep the numbers from winning. That was why she noticed the man at the bar for what he was within seconds of greeting him, and why she decided almost as quickly that she would not fight him. She had been doing this long enough to know his type. The tone he used, the way he looked at her like she was part of the furniture, the too loud jokes aimed at the people within earshot. A small, tired part of her wanted to remind him she was a person, to let him know that the way he spoke to her had weight. But another sharper part reminded her that there were tips to be made and bills to be paid. It was not that she was afraid of confrontation. She had handled much worse than him on bad nights when the bar was full and tempers ran hot. But tonight, her patience felt like a finite thing, something she had to ration carefully. Arguing with him would burn through it too quickly. So she chose the easier path. She would keep her responses short, her tone neutral, and get his order done quickly. The goal was simple: move on to the next table where the smiles were genuine, the conversation easy, and the tips worth the trouble. She poured his drink without looking at him longer than she had to, wrote down his steak order, and ignored the unnecessary commentary that came with it. The trick was to let it pass through her without catching on anything inside. Let him talk. Let him think he was winning something. Every minute she kept her focus was a minute closer to the end of her shift, closer to adding a few more dollars to the envelope she kept hidden in her dresser. This was the math of her nights. Not just totals and tips, but the quiet calculation of what to let go in order to keep going. Tonight, she decided, he was not worth the cost of anything more than her professionalism. The glass was cool against her palm as she weaved her way back to the bar, the amber liquid catching the light. He was leaning back on the stool now, one arm slung across the counter as if he had been waiting for her all along. She set the drink down in front of him, already reaching for her notepad in case he wanted to add to his order. Appetizer, he said without looking at her, eyes instead fixed on something over her shoulder. He pulled a thick, worn leather wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket, thumbing it open with the same careless air he had carried all evening. The wallet slipped. It hit the tile floor with a dull, heavy thud, the flap springing open on impact. A few bills slid across the floor toward the base of a bar stool. Coins rattled away in opposite directions. She crouched automatically, gathering the scattered money, the wallet itself still lying open on the floor. The leather was cracked, edges darkened from years of use. She reached for it, her eyes flicking briefly to its contents before she could stop herself. There was the usual mess of folded cash and bank cards, a few crumpled receipts wedged in one corner, but tucked deep in the main fold was something else. A laminated ID, not the standard driver's license shape, folded tightly in thirds as though it had been hidden that way for a long time. Beside it, pressed between the leather and a line of old membership cards, was a small, grainy photograph printed on matte paper. Her breath caught. It was not a personal photo. It was the type you saw on a police bulletin. A headshot in flat, official lighting, the kind posted on community notice boards at grocery stores and bus stops. She had seen this one just last week, pinned beside a warning about a man wanted for armed robbery 2 towns over. She remembered the bold type above it, armed and dangerous, and the details listed below about the stolen vehicle and the cash that had never been recovered. The photo in the wallet was identical. The face in it was younger, the hair cropped shorter, but the line of the jaw and the eyes were the same. She had looked at that poster long enough while waiting in line for groceries to be certain. She gathered the last bill from the floor, sliding it back into the wallet, her movements slow and deliberate. The noise of the bar seemed to fade under the rush in her ears. She closed the flap and stood, forcing her expression to remain unchanged. He was watching her now, a faint smirk curling his mouth. Find something interesting? She placed the wallet on the counter with the rest of the money. Just making sure nothing got lost, she said evenly. He took it back, still smiling, as if the moment had been some kind of test. She turned away before he could say more, her mind already racing through what she had seen and what she needed to do next without letting him suspect a thing. Her fingers tightened slightly around the worn leather, but she did not let the motion show. Her pulse quickened in a steady, deliberate drumbeat that seemed far too loud for the bustling noise of the restaurant. She kept her breathing even, the same way she did on busy nights when orders came in faster than she could write them down. The image was burned into her mind. She had seen it stapled to the corkboard at the corner grocery store just a week ago. The paper had been curled at the edges, the ink smudged from curious hands lifting it for a closer look. A man wanted for an armed robbery, last seen only a couple of towns away. The grainy photograph had caught her attention even then because of the eyes. They were sharp, assessing, like they could strip a person down to their smallest truths. Now those same eyes were sitting across from her, watching her. The hair in the wallet photograph was shorter, darker. The jawline was a little leaner now, as though time and distance had worn it down. But it was him. She was certain. Her smile did not falter as she straightened, letting the wallet rest in her palm. She bent to gather the last stray bill and slid it inside, careful to fold it so it would not look disturbed. Her eyes never lingered on the incriminating photograph again, but its details sat vivid and unshakable in her mind. She set the wallet back on the counter with a light tap of her fingertips. "You dropped this," she said evenly. Her tone, the same one she used to deliver hot plates or offer dessert menus. He took it from her with a grin that was just a little too easy. "Thanks," he replied, tucking it back into his jacket without glancing inside. She nodded once and turned away, feeling his gaze follow her. Each step back toward the bar service station was deliberate, her body moving through the familiar motions of wiping down the counter and checking tickets. She forced herself not to glance over her shoulder, not to betray the way her thoughts had shifted in an instant. If she was wrong, she would be making a dangerous accusation. If she was right, she was standing a few feet away from someone the police had warned the public about. Either way, she could not afford to show her hand too soon. Her mind was already ticking through possibilities. She could slip into the kitchen and use the phone. She could get to the manager's office and pull up the non-emergency police line. She would need to give a clear description, seat location, and any detail that could confirm her suspicion without sending him running before help arrived. Behind her, his voice rose again, loud enough for the nearby patrons to hear. He was making another joke, something about how quickly she had returned his drink earlier. They laughed politely, but she caught the edge in it. That same confidence she had seen in the bulletin photo. She kept her back to him and her face calm, even as her pulse climbed. She could still see those eyes, and she knew she had to act before the night took a turn she could not control. She placed the wallet into his open hand and kept her expression exactly where it had been all night, somewhere between polite professionalism and detached courtesy. The smile on her lips was steady, the same one she used for anyone who thought being rude made them interesting. Inside, her mind was running hard, fitting pieces together, the edges of the police bulletin sharp in her memory. She could not let him see any shift in her face. If he caught even a flicker of the recognition that had just passed through her, he might stand up and walk out. Worse, he might run. Her goal now was to keep him exactly where he was until she could make the call. With her pen still in hand, she reached for his glass. "Let me top that off for you," she said casually, as if the wallet incident had been nothing more than a clumsy moment in a busy night. She filled the water from the pitcher in smooth motions, careful to keep her body relaxed. Across the bar, a regular customer called her name with a joke about his usual order. She laughed just enough to make it sound real, using the moment to ease herself away from the man's seat. Her steps were unhurried, her eyes never darting toward the counter where the phone was hidden from view. She slid a coaster under another customer's drink, wiped a small spill with the corner of her apron, and nodded to a couple waiting for their check. Each action was a beat in a rhythm she had perfected over years, moving with purpose while looking like she had all the time in the world. As she made her way toward the service station, she could feel him watching her. Whether it was curiosity, habit, or suspicion, she didn't know. She made a point to pause by another table, leaning in to answer a question about the specials, giving him the sense that her attention was elsewhere. Her hand found the edge of the counter, her fingers brushing the cool laminate near the register. She kept her back to him as she reached for the small black phone mounted to the underside of the shelf. Her voice, when she spoke into it, was low and clipped, meant for the ear of the dispatcher alone. She gave the seat location first, then the man's description, including the exact suit color, the silver watch, the way his hair was styled. She mentioned the wallet, the folded ID, the photograph from the bulletin. The dispatcher told her to keep him there if she could. Officers were on their way. She hung up and stepped back into the flow of the restaurant as if nothing had happened. The hum of conversation, the clink of cutlery, the hiss from the kitchen all folded around her again. She picked up his appetizer order from the pass, set it in front of him with the same practiced smile, and asked if there was anything else he needed. He smirked and shook his head, oblivious to the fact that every second he stayed in that seat was another second she had given the police to get through the door. The kitchen was loud with the usual Friday night rush, but she moved through it like a shadow, ducking past a line cook, carrying plates, and slipping into the narrow corner where the phone hung on the wall. She picked up the receiver, shielding her mouth with her hand as if she were just taking a quick call from a supplier. Her voice was low and quick, her words tumbling out in short bursts. She gave the dispatcher the man's description first, noting the dark navy suit, the silver watch, and the slicked back hair. She described his build, the way he sat at the bar, the exact stool he occupied. And then she mentioned the wallet, how it had fallen, how she had seen the folded ID and the small printed photograph, and how that image matched the police bulletin from the robbery alert. The dispatcher's voice was steady, the kind of calm that came from hearing things like this every day. They asked her to confirm his location again. She did, glancing toward the pass-through window to make sure no one was watching her too closely. She was told officers were en route, the instruction was clear, keep him there, whatever it took. She hung up the phone and took a deep breath, smoothing her apron and steadying her hands before stepping back into the noise and heat of the kitchen. The key now was not to let him see the shift in her. She picked up a tray with a couple of drinks bound for another table and walked out as if she had never left the floor. When she reached his side, she let the faintest warmth into her smile. "How's everything so far?" she asked, as if she were genuinely interested in his opinion. He smirked. "Getting there," he said, swirling the last of his scotch in the glass. She leaned slightly toward him, lowering her voice just enough to make it sound conspiratorial. "You know," she said, "we have this dessert that's not on the menu. How special. I could bring you one on the house just to thank you for being patient earlier." He chuckled, clearly enjoying the attention. "On the house, huh? Sure, why not?" She nodded and walked away, hiding the relief that came from knowing she had bought a few more minutes. In the kitchen, she asked the pastry station to prepare a slice of cake and plate it with extra garnish. She carried it out slowly, careful not to rush. When she set it in front of him, he grinned and picked up his fork. She made a show of checking on the couple next to him, topping off their drinks and laughing at a light comment one of them made. All the while, she kept him in her peripheral vision, watching for any sign that he might stand up or make for the door. Every second he lingered was another step closer to the officers walking in, and she was determined that he would still be in that seat when they did. The door opened with the chime that always rang too loudly during service, but this time she heard it over the din of clinking silverware and murmured conversations. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, their movements unhurried. They could have been there for a quick coffee, for all the attention they drew at first. She kept her eyes on the man at the bar, watching the way he lifted his fork and took another bite of cake, unaware of what was about to happen. The officers split without a word, one drifting toward the far end of the counter, the other making a slow approach down the aisle that would bring him directly to the man's back. She busied herself wiping the edge of a nearby table, every muscle taut, waiting for the moment. The first officer reached the bar, resting a hand lightly on the polished surface. He spoke low, something she could not hear over the soft jazz playing through the speakers. The man's fork hovered above the plate. He turned his head, half a smirk still on his lips. That smirk faltered when the second officer stepped in from behind, his shadow falling across the plate. Words were exchanged too quietly for her to catch, but she saw the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his eyes darted toward the door before realizing it was already too late. One officer produced a pair of handcuffs, the metallic click sharp enough to cut through the background noise. The other reached for the man's arm, guiding it behind his back with practiced efficiency. The man tried to speak, his voice louder now, but whatever argument he started was drowned out by the collective silence that had settled over the room. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Forks hung above plates. Every set of eyes was on the bar. His face shifted from confusion to indignation, then to something smaller, shock, maybe, or the dawning awareness that whatever game he had been playing was over. The officers guided him off the stool and toward the door, one keeping a steady hand on his arm, the other scanning the room as if to make sure no one else would interfere. The bell above the door rang again as they stepped outside, the sound oddly final. She felt her own breath leave her in a slow exhale. Her hands were still steady, but her heartbeat drummed in her ears. Without making a show of it, she turned and slipped back into the kitchen, letting the noise of service close around her like nothing had happened. Inside, though, the adrenaline was still coursing. It did not take long for the story to make its way through the staff. A busser who had seen the whole thing whispered to a line cook, who passed it to the dishwasher, who told the hostess. By the time her next order was ready, she could feel the glances from coworkers, the quiet nods of respect. The quiet waitress, the one who never seemed rattled by anything, had just helped take down a wanted man without breaking stride. When she clocked out that night, the tips in her pocket were heavier than usual, but what she carried out into the cool air beyond the restaurant door was something different, something that hummed in her chest. It was not just the money, it was the knowledge that she had done more than serve a table. She had stood her ground, kept her composure, and sent danger walking out in handcuffs.